Imagine standing in the heart of Rome, surrounded by thousands of years of history. In front of you stands one of the most recognizable monuments in the world, the Colosseum. Built nearly 2,000 years ago, this enormous amphitheater witnessed spectacular games, brutal battles, celebrations, and countless stories from the Roman Empire. Today, it remains one of the greatest symbols of ancient Rome. The story of the Colosseum begins in the 1st century AD. Construction started around the year 72 AD under the Roman Emperor Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty. At that time, Rome was recovering from a period of political turmoil. Vespasian wanted to create a massive public building where ordinary Roman citizens could gather and enjoy entertainment. The location was carefully chosen. The Colosseum was built in the center of Rome, on land that had once been occupied by the enormous private palace of Emperor Nero. When Vespasian began the project, he was sending a powerful message: this space would no longer belong only to the emperor. It would belong to the people of Rome. The construction was an enormous engineering achievement. The building was made primarily from concrete, travertine stone, volcanic stone, and bricks. It was approximately 189 meters long, 156 meters wide, and originally stood around 48 meters high. When completed, it could accommodate tens of thousands of spectators. The Colosseum was officially inaugurated around 80 AD by Vespasian's son, Emperor Titus. Ancient sources tell us that the opening celebrations lasted for many days and included spectacular public entertainment. But what exactly happened inside this enormous arena? The Colosseum was designed for public spectacles. Gladiators fought one another in dramatic combat. Some were professional fighters who trained for years. Others were enslaved people or prisoners forced into the arena. Their lives depended on their ability to survive. There were also wild animal hunts. Exotic animals such as lions, elephants, bears, and other creatures were brought from different parts of the Roman Empire. These events demonstrated the enormous power and wealth of Rome. The Colosseum could also be transformed for elaborate performances. Beneath the arena was a complicated underground network known as the Hypogeum. It contained tunnels, rooms, cages, lifts, and mechanisms that allowed animals, gladiators, and scenery to suddenly appear in the arena. Imagine sitting in the audience nearly 2,000 years ago and suddenly watching a wild animal emerge from beneath the floor. For Roman spectators, these spectacles were a form of entertainment, but they also demonstrated the power of the emperor and the Roman state. The Colosseum was carefully designed to control the movement of enormous crowds. It had numerous entrances and stairways, allowing tens of thousands of people to enter and leave relatively quickly. Different sections were assigned to different social groups, reflecting the strict hierarchy of Roman society. The most important people sat closest to the arena, while ordinary citizens occupied higher levels. The building itself was also protected from the intense Roman sun. A huge retractable canopy, known as the Velarium, could be extended over parts of the Colosseum. Sailors from the Roman Navy were reportedly involved in operating this enormous system. But the history of the Colosseum was not only about entertainment. Over the centuries, the Roman Empire changed. Eventually, the great spectacles became less frequent, and the Colosseum gradually lost its original purpose. The Colosseum was damaged by earthquakes, especially during the medieval period. Valuable stone and metal were also removed from the structure and reused in other buildings across Rome. For centuries, parts of the Colosseum were used for different purposes. It became a symbol of Rome's changing history rather than simply an ancient arena. Today, millions of visitors come to Rome to stand beneath its enormous arches and imagine the world that existed almost 2,000 years ago. What makes the Colosseum so fascinating is not simply its size. It is the human history connected to its stones. Every corridor, arch, and broken wall reminds us of a civilization that once controlled a vast part of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The Colosseum represents Roman engineering, architecture, politics, entertainment, and social life, but it also reminds us of the darker side of ancient society, where human lives could become part of public spectacle. As you walk around the ancient arena today, there are no gladiatorial battles here. The crowds have changed, the city has changed, and the Roman Empire is long gone. But the Colosseum remains. Its walls have survived nearly 2,000 years of earthquakes, wars, weather, political changes, and the transformation of Rome itself. The Colosseum is not simply a building from the past. It is a bridge between ancient Rome and the modern world. Standing here today, we can look at the same enormous arches that Romans saw centuries ago and remember that civilizations rise, change, and eventually disappear, while the traces they leave behind can continue to tell their stories. The Colosseum stands as one of those extraordinary traces. A monument to the power and creativity of ancient Rome, reminder of its achievements, and also a reminder of the human cost behind some of its spectacular traditions. So, when you visit Rome and stand before the Colosseum, don't just look at the stones. Look beyond them. Imagine the people who built it, the crowds who filled it, the gladiators who entered its arena, and the centuries of history that follow. Because the Colosseum is more than an ancient amphitheater. It is the story of Rome itself, written in stone. And nearly 2,000 years later, that story is still being heard. Imagine walking through the ruins of ancient Rome, surrounded by towering columns, broken temples, ancient roads, and stones that have witnessed more than 2,000 years of history. Welcome to the Roman Forum and Palatine Hill, two of the most important archaeological sites in Rome. Together, they tell the story of how a small ancient settlement grew into one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. The Roman Forum was once the political, religious, and social center of ancient Rome. It was not simply a collection of ruins. For centuries, this was the place where Roman citizens came to conduct business, worship their gods, attend political meetings, hear speeches, and witness important public events. Imagine this area nearly 2,000 years ago. Instead of quiet ruins, you would have seen crowded streets filled with citizens, senators, merchants, soldiers, religious leaders, and government officials. The Forum developed gradually over many centuries. Originally, the area was a low and marshy valley between Rome's hills. The early Romans drained the land and transformed it into a public space. As Rome became more powerful, magnificent temples, government buildings, basilicas, monuments, and public spaces were constructed here. One of the most important buildings was the Senate House, known as the Curia. This was where Roman senators gathered to debate political matters and make decisions affecting the Republic and, later, the Empire. Nearby stood the Rostra, a famous speaking platform. From here, powerful politicians and public figures addressed the people of Rome. Some of the greatest speeches in Roman history were connected with this area. The Forum was also filled with temples dedicated to Roman gods and goddesses. Among the most important was the Temple of Saturn. Its famous columns still stand today, reminding visitors of the grandeur that once filled this valley. Another important monument was the Arch of Septimius Severus, built in the early 3rd century AD. Triumphal arches like this celebrated Roman military victories and reminded citizens of the power of the empire. But the Roman Forum was not the only place that tells the story of Rome. Rising directly beside it is Palatine Hill. According to Roman tradition, Palatine Hill was one of the most important places in the city's legendary foundation. The ancient story tells us that Rome was founded by twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. They were said to have been abandoned as infants and later raised by a she-wolf. According to legend, the brothers eventually decided to establish a city. After a conflict between them, Romulus became the founder of Rome. The traditional date for the founding of Rome is 753 BC, and according to the legend, Romulus established his settlement on Palatine Hill. During the imperial period, the hill was transformed by enormous imperial palaces. Emperors such as Augustus lived here, and later rulers expanded the complex dramatically. Imagine standing on Palatine Hill nearly 2,000 years ago. Instead of the peaceful archaeological landscape we see today, you would have looked across an enormous imperial complex filled with marble buildings, gardens, fountains, courtyards, and decorated rooms. From the hill, Roman rulers could also look down toward the Roman Forum. The Forum below represented the political and public life of Rome, while the Palatine represented imperial power and luxury. Together, they formed an extraordinary center of Roman civilization. The Roman Empire became increasingly difficult to control, political power shifted, and the Western Roman Empire eventually collapsed in the 5th century AD. The Roman Forum gradually lost its importance. Buildings were abandoned, damaged, or reused. Over many centuries, parts of the ancient city disappeared beneath soil and vegetation. Some stones were taken away and reused in other buildings. Centuries later, archaeologists began uncovering the ancient remains and studying the buildings, roads, inscriptions, and monuments. Today, when visitors walk through the Roman Forum, they are walking through the remains of the political heart of ancient Rome. Every stone has a story. The ancient roads remind us of people who walked here thousands of years ago. The temples remind us of Roman religion. The Senate buildings remind us of the political system that influenced governments for centuries. And the ruins of Palatine Hill remind us of the emperors who once ruled one of the largest empires in history. Today, the Forum is quiet. Grass grows between ancient stones. Birds fly above broken columns. Tourists walk slowly through the ruins, trying to imagine what once stood here. But almost 2,000 years ago, this same place was filled with movement, voices, ceremonies, political arguments, religious rituals, and enormous celebrations. The Roman Forum and Palatine Hill are therefore much more than archaeological ruins. They are a window into the world of ancient Rome, a world that produced extraordinary architecture, powerful political institutions, engineering achievements, military expansion, and a culture that continues to influence the modern world. So, as you walk through the Forum and climb Palatine Hill, take a moment to look beyond the broken columns and fallen walls. Imagine the people who stood here. Imagine the senators debating inside the Curia. Imagine Roman citizens gathering around the Rostra. Imagine emperors looking across the Forum from their magnificent palaces. But their stones still speak. They tell the story of the birth, greatness, transformation, and eventual decline of ancient Rome. And that is what makes this ancient landscape one of the most unforgettable places in the world.